Course in Miracles, Chapter 15, The Holy Instant, and this is Section 9, and it's called The Holy Instant and the Attraction of God. As the ego would limit your perception of your brothers to the body, so would the Holy Spirit release your vision and let you see the great rays shining from them, so unlimited that they reach to God. It is this shift to vision that is accomplished in the Holy Instant. Yet it is needful for you to learn just what this shift entails, so you will become willing to make it permanent. Given this willingness, it will not leave you, for it is permanent. Once you have accepted it as the only perception you want, it is translated into knowledge by the part that God himself plays in the atonement, for it is the only step in it he understands. Therefore, in this, there will be no delay when you are ready for it. God is ready now, but you are not. Our task is but to continue as fast as possible the necessary process of looking straight at all the interference and seeing it exactly as it is. For it is impossible to recognize as wholly without gratification what you think you want. The body is the symbol of the ego, as the ego is the symbol of the separation. And both are nothing more than attempts to limit communication and thereby to make it impossible. For communication must be unlimited in order to have meaning, and deprived of meaning, it will not satisfy you completely. Yet it remains the only means by which you can establish real relationships, which have no limits, having been established by God. In the holy instant, where the great rays replace the body and awareness, the recognition of relationships without limits is given you. But in order to see this, it is necessary to give up every use the ego has for the body, and to accept the fact that the ego has no purpose you would share with it. For the ego would limit everyone to a body for its own purposes, and while you think it has a purpose, you will choose to utilize the means by which it tries to turn its purpose into accomplishment. This will never be accomplished. Yet you have surely recognized that the ego, whose goals are altogether unattainable, will strive for them with all its might, and will do so with the strength that you have given it. It is impossible to divide your strength between heaven and hell, God and the ego, and release your power to creation, which is the only purpose for which it was given you. Love would always give increase. Limits are demanded by the ego and represent its demands to make little and ineffectual. Limit your sight of a brother to his body, which you will do as long as you would not release him from it, and you have denied his gift to you. His body cannot give it, and seek it not through yours. Yet your minds are already continuous, and their union need only be accepted, and the loneliness in heaven is gone. If you would but let the Holy Spirit tell you of the love of God for you, and the need your creations have to be with you forever, you would experience the attraction of the eternal. No one can hear him speak of this and long remain willing to linger here. For it is your will to be in heaven, where you are complete and quiet, in such sure and loving relationships that any limit is impossible. Would you not exchange your little relationships for this? For the body is little and limited, and only those whom you would see without the limits the ego would impose on them can offer you the gift of freedom. You have no conception of the limits you have placed on your perception, and no idea of all the loveliness that you could see. But this you must remember, the attraction of guilt opposes the attraction of God. His attraction for you remains unlimited, but because your power, being his, is as great as his, you can turn away from love. What you invest in guilt, you withdraw from God, and your sight grows weak and dim and limited, for you have attempted to separate the Father from the Son and limit their communication. Seek not atonement in further separation, and limit not your vision of God's Son to what interferes with his release and what the Holy Spirit must undo to set him free. For his belief in limits has imprisoned him. When the body ceases to attract you, and when you place no value on it as a means of getting anything, then there will be no interference in communication, and your thoughts will be as free as God's. As you let the Holy Spirit teach you how to use the body only for purposes of communication and renounce its use for separation and attack which the ego sees in it, you will learn you have no need of a body at all. In the holy instant there are no bodies, and you experience only the attraction of God. Accepting it as undivided, you join him wholly in an instant, for you would place no limits on your union with him. The reality of this relationship becomes the only truth that you could ever want. All truth is here. Okay. This section is called The Holy Instant and the Attraction of God. There's a lot that's being said here. It's a lot of things that Jesus has already said, but he's actually saying some things a little bit more explicitly. For example, let me read you this part here. Again, you have no conception of the limits you have placed on your perception and no idea of all the loveliness that you could see. He uses the word loveliness. I think, keep in mind, this is written dualistically. Jesus is writing, these are just symbols, as Jesus says, symbols of symbols. The experience is something different. No words can really describe it. Jesus talks here about the great rays. Now, does that mean that you're actually going to see great rays? I think it's just, it's a metaphor, right? It's like the rays of the sun, right? The rays of the sun. The sun is always shining, and you will either see, you will see the body, which is a limit on perception, which is a limit, is basically, Jesus says the body is the symbol of the ego, as the ego is the symbol of the separation. It's something he says here in this section. The body is the symbol of the ego, and the ego is the symbol of the separation. So if you see the body, which is a limit on love, you won't see the great rays and the loveliness, which is just, I think that's really just metaphor, right? Also, this idea that God will take the last step. We'll read that in a moment, but let's finish reading this part. You have no conception of the limits you have placed on your perception and no idea of all the loveliness that you could see. But this you must remember, the attraction of guilt opposes the attraction of God. His attraction for you remains unlimited, but because your power being his is as great as his, you can turn away from love. Because your power being his is as great as his. This is like, Jesus has kind of said this before, but now he comes right out and says it. Your power being as great as God's, being his is as great as God's. That's why the ego is so powerful, right? But the reason why the ego is nothing, the power of God is there. There's a great line earlier where it says the ego is foolproof, but it's not God-proof. The ego is very, very powerful, and don't underestimate the power of the ego. Jesus says that time and again here. Do not deny the power of the ego. It is very powerful. Why? Jesus tells you right here, it has the power of God, and we have the power of God. So we are able to use that power to take us to hell or take us to heaven. It's our choice. And Jesus is explaining why we might want to stay in hell, right? Because we want to be separate. We like to be separate. We like, for all the suffering that we undergo, we still want to be separate. We're willful. we're wayward and willful in this, but it's also, in many ways, it's ignorance. It's just ignorance of the truth. And Jesus is here to help us to know the truth, to set us free. So he's trying to explain this whole situation to us. Your sight grows weak and dim and limited, for you have attempted to separate the Father from the Son and limit their communication. Seek not atonement in further separation, and limit not your vision of God's Son to what interferes with his release and what the Holy Spirit must undo to set him free. For his belief in limits has imprisoned him. So there's interference, right? The interference is the desire, the will not to return, the will to stay separate, the will to be in a body and to see others as bodies. A little earlier, we could kind of pick this apart and look at the wordplay and look at some of the nuances, but I'll just point out one little thing that I noticed. He says, for the ego would limit everyone to a body for its own purposes. He doesn't say for the ego would limit everybody to a body. He says everyone. What's the difference between everyone and everybody, right? Jesus doesn't want to say that we're a body. Ultimately, we are not a body. We're everyone. We are one, right? Everyone is one. Every one of us is everyone. Is everyone, you could say. We are not a body, and if we see our brother as a body, and if we make the physical the priority, and we put that as the most important thing, we will limit our perception of God. We will limit our understanding, and ultimately we will just block our own way. And so Jesus is trying to help us to understand how to get back, how to release the interference, to bring back once again the permanent knowledge that is always there. God is permanent. He says that here at the beginning. Is needful for you to learn just what this shift entails, so you will become willing to make it permanent. Given this willingness, it will not leave you, for it is permanent. So we have to have the willingness to make it permanent, and that's something most of us don't have. We're ambivalent. Sometimes we go in that direction. We go towards love. We go towards not seeing separation, not seeing bodies. And other times we don't, right? We go back and forth. We waver. We're ambivalent. We're not consistent. And Jesus is trying to help us and show us why we would even want to be consistent, and why we even want to make this permanent. It's a big one. Let's just go to that. In Hinduism, there's this idea of reincarnation, karma and reincarnation, right? Meaning that you keep coming back into a body until you get to the point where, as Jesus says in the Course, you get to that point where it becomes intolerable. The pain and the suffering becomes intolerable, and you realize there's got to be a better way, and you seek that better way. And in seeking that better way, you realize, again, this is in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Hindu tradition, that the goal is to not go back into a body again, not to reincarnate, even though it's a consolation for many people to think, well, I will reincarnate. The only problem with reincarnation is you don't remember, right? So great, so you reincarnate, but you won't remember, so what's the point of reincarnating? This is aiming at something deeper. This is aiming at going back to source, where you do not need to return to a body, although you could if you wanted to, but you don't need to, because you have liberated yourself from the body. Let's read this last part. When the body ceases to attract you, and when you place no value on it as a means of getting anything, then there will be no interference in communication, and your thoughts will be as free as God's. As you let the Holy Spirit teach you how to use the body only for purposes of communication and renounce its use for separation and attack, which the ego sees in it, you will learn you have no need of a body at all. Okay, the body is a limit, and ultimately we will all realize ultimately that we have no need of the body. That's a big one. That's a very big one. Even to think those thoughts is like almost unthinkable. for us to think, what would I be without my body? What would that even look like? In the holy instant, there are no bodies, and you experience only the attraction of God. So the ego is no more, the body is no more in the holy instant. You go beyond the body, you go beyond the world, and you experience this timeless presence, the eternity, which is God. Accepting it as undivided, you join him wholly in an instant, for you would place no limits on your union with him. The reality of this relationship becomes the only truth that you could ever want. All truth is here. So once again, Jesus is pointing to the holy instant, which is this experience. He also calls it revelation. It's this experience of going beyond the body, transcending the body. The ego dissolves. There's no fear. There is no past. There's no future. There is only the eternal present. Now, that sounds scary from where we are. That sounds like, why would I really want that? I like being in a body. I like being here. I like life. I like, I like being around other bodies. I like, life is fun, and life is, for all its problems, there is a lot going on here. Why would I want to be in eternity? And I think that's one of the biggest sticking points of all this is, heaven must be really boring. Who would want to be in heaven? I'd much rather go to hell in a bucket, as the Grateful Dead sang, I may be going to hell in a bucket, but at least I'm enjoying the ride. The question is, are we really enjoying, are we really enjoying, is it real joy? Is it real love that we experience here? Or is it a pale reflection of the reality of what it is? All of this is very, again, this is all very challenging. I think you have to have that experience of the holy instant to have, or some kind of spiritual experience that gives you a glimpse, that gives you something that shows you what it is. And then that's what makes people seekers, right? Because they have had some kind of glimpse, they've had some kind of and then they're like, oh yeah, there is something more. There is another world. There is another reality. But until you have that glimpse, it's, you may not even, that's why people don't even pick up the book. They don't even, they're not really attracted even to spirituality, or they are against it or fearful or whatever it is. So anyway, that's enough for right now. Next section is the time of rebirth. That's section 10, the time of rebirth, and we'll get there soon. Thank you so much for listening. Always would love any comments or feedback you have. See you soon. Om.